All right, let's talk about Notre Dame. National Championship game preview and prediction. They are playing the Ohio State Buckeyes. And the number one thing I want to say, because Ohio State's favored by over a touchdown. And you're going to see as I work through the predictions, you're going to see how much I think it maybe would be a tall task for Notre Dame to pull out a win in this game. I want you to appreciate this moment. If you're a Notre Dame fan, appreciate this moment. If you're not a Notre Dame fan, but if you're a fan of college football, I want you to appreciate this moment because Notre Dame is here. And Notre Dame is in one of the biggest brands, one of the most unique brands in college football. They're in the national championship game despite a litany of key injuries. It's a testament to Marcus Freeman's culture. It's a testament to the team that he's put together. Notre Dame may lose, right? 100%. Ohio State's favored by 9.5, or at least it was 9.5 at the time that I wrote that. I'm sure that there's been money on one or the other side for this game. Notre Dame may lose, and they may lose by a lot, but they got here. And the way they did that is undoubtedly honorable. They took a real tough loss to Northern Illinois at the beginning of the year. If you're like me, at least in week 2, right, that early in the year, the conversation partially was that maybe Notre Dame misses the playoff entirely because we didn't know that the SEC was going to completely blow itself up. We didn't know that the ACC was going to have a couple teams stumble like they did. We're looking at Miami. We're in some ways looking at Clemson, although obviously they ended up, or not Clemson, I'm sorry, SMU, but of course SMU ended up getting in anyway. The conversation was that maybe Notre Dame was going to miss the playoff entirely after that loss, especially if they took another one, but they didn't. They started blowing out teams, and they marched all the way to the playoff, and once they got there, continued to dominate teams until the semifinals, in which case they squeaked past Penn State. So the fact that Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame, this independent school, not in a conference, they get here and they go to the national championship game. And yeah, the playoff format is a little bit messed up. The way they set this whole thing up is a little bit askew. And maybe these aren't truly the two best teams in the country because they had obscure paths to get there. But at the end of the day, Ohio State beat the number 1 team and Notre Dame beat the number 2 team. So it's not the worst national championship that we've seen, that we've ever seen. Notre Dame is here, right? They got here. I want this to be appreciated. And before I preview this game and basically explain to you all the reasons why it's going to be very difficult for Notre Dame to win, I want this to be appreciated because this may not happen again in the near future. This may not happen again ever. And certainly in the next few years, it might be very difficult for Notre Dame to mount a great season, a miraculous season, a wonderful season like they have in this one. So let's talk about Ohio State. Team profile, right? Everyone probably watching this show has watched Ohio State this year. You probably know what you're looking at, and obviously very world-renowned program. They lost to Michigan, and then they won 3 playoff games, 42-17 versus the 7th team in the country, Tennessee, 41-21 against the number 1 team in Oregon, and 28-14 versus number 3, Texas. Remember, that was a one-possession game for the majority of it. Jack Sawyer had that strip sack return touchdown to make it 2 possessions at the very end of the game. So that game was closer the entire time than maybe 28-14 suggests, even though that's not the widest margin of victory either. The thing about Ohio State, especially in the playoff, has been their unrelenting defense. They're number 1 in the country in opponents' points per game. They hold teams to an average of 12.2 points per game all year. That counts the regular season, that counts the playoffs. Their opponents' yards per game as well is very strong, 250.1 total. That's running, that's passing. Combined, they're at 250. And opponent yards per play, 3.9, very high in those categories as well. Effectively a top 3 run defense, a top 10 pass defense. They're number 1 in opponents' pass yards per game. Now, the biggest thing to me, so I just talked about how they can stop the run. I just talked about how they have a great secondary. And those are 2 of the 3 primary pieces of a defense. The third is the pass rush. And Ohio State, maybe during the playoffs, this has been their best quality on defense. They had 4 sacks against Texas. They've had, I believe, 16 sacks across those 3 games as a whole. 9 TFLs against Texas as well. And on top of that, Notre Dame still is missing their starting center from way earlier in the year. And Anthony Knapp, their offensive tackle, is going to be out. So Notre Dame, even since last game, is going to have, and if you took the 5 starting linemen from last game and said this is the best they've got, which it wasn't, but if it was, still you're taking away a key player in that offensive tackle, taking him out of that lineup for Ohio State. So Ohio State, one of the best defenses in the country, certainly during the playoffs, the best pass rush in the country, is going against a weakened Notre Dame offensive line. The defense has been, again, absolutely unrelenting. 12.2 points per game is how many the opponents of the Ohio State Buckeyes have had throughout the year. On the other side of the ball, they, of course, have a talent-laden offense, and this is why Ohio State is playing the way that they are. Will Howard, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Carnell Tate, Emeka Egbuka, Jeremiah Smith. That's just a list of, 6 players right there that all absolutely could be NFL guys and can take over a game on their own. Jeremiah Smith is going to be a massive threat. He was kind of taken away by Texas in some ways, but it doesn't matter because Carnell Tate, Emeka Egbuka, of course, that pair of running backs, Ohio State's going to have ways to beat you somehow offensively, and that's paired with the fact that their defense is going to give their offense plenty of chances to take leads and extend leads. So how Notre Dame can win this game it's very difficult, right? It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be an upset. It's going to have to be a real heavy effort for Notre Dame if they're going to be able to knock off what really is maybe not the number one team in the country, but certainly playing like the number one team in the country. And of course, naturally, whoever wins the national championship is going to be considered the number one team in the country. So Ohio State is probably the most difficult college football team to play on Monday. Ohio State's the most difficult one to go against. So Notre Dame's keys to win, right? Number one is what I'm calling accepting the gambit, all right? Notre Dame is going to have to accept the gambit of Ohio State playing great defense. Ohio State is going to fluster Riley Leonard. They're going to lock down your receivers, especially because Notre Dame's receiving room is maybe not one of the top few in the country, and they're going to stuff the run. Jeremiah Love is going to struggle. He hasn't had 100 yards in a game since the game against Indiana, and even that one was a little bit iffy because of that big run very early on in the game. Of course, that touchdown. If you take away that one play, then the stats are very different there. Of course, you can't. That counts, but still, Jeremiah Love didn't have 100 yards against Georgia, didn't have 100 yards against Penn State. Riley Leonard, I believe, outrushed him both times. He certainly did in the Georgia game. So Ohio State, they're going to stuff the run. They're going to lock away your receivers. They're going to get to Riley Leonard. They're going to play great defense, and Notre Dame probably isn't going to be able to score. Sure, this is the national championship game, but Ohio State has played some great teams all year, and like I said, Tennessee, high-powered offense, hold them to 17. Oregon held them to 21. Texas held them to 14. Michigan held them to 10, right? And maybe Michigan offensively isn't the best example, but if Ohio State is holding teams to an average of 12.2 points per game, naturally Notre Dame is going to struggle to score. So what Notre Dame needs to do is really just accept that and keep the game low scoring, because the one thing Ohio State definitely can do is get going out of the gate and keep going and continue rolling that ball down the hill. And the next thing you know, Ohio State has 42 on the board or 41 on the board. Tennessee and Oregon have a lot to say about that. The team that showed the most fight and seemed like they had the most high chance of knocking off Ohio State in the playoff was Texas. And they kept Ohio State to 21 points for the vast majority of that game until, of course, that blunder in the fourth quarter. So Texas, really, at the end of the day, was down one possession with the ball in the red zone, and they were in that spot. The only team that's really put themselves in that close of a position to beat Ohio State was Texas, and they kept the game as low scoring as possible. It's very hard to stay on pace with Ohio State. And Notre Dame, by the way, does not have the offense that can keep pace with Ohio State. If they go up 2 scores right away, Riley Leonard, we know, it's a given known about Notre Dame that they don't really have the ability to throw the ball down the field as well as maybe they would like to. With Riley Leonard and those receivers, Notre Dame doesn't play well from behind. They've come back from a 10-point deficit against Penn State, but for the most part, that's it. If Ohio State gets going out of the gate like we know they can and like we know they have against Tennessee and Oregon, it may very well be just a lost game from there, and Notre Dame's going to get blown away. So accept that gambit. Say, all right, if you're going to lock down our offense, we're going to do the same thing to you, at least the most that we can. It doesn't have to mean that Notre Dame has to jump out to an early lead, because we know that their team is built to play well from leads. That's how they've blown out some of these teams, is they start up 10-0 and then they just cruise from there because Jeremiah Love can run against anybody, it felt, at least throughout the season, and that offense can certainly keep humming throughout the game. So on defense, if at the end of the day, if this is going to start on defense, if Notre Dame keeping this game low scoring is going to start on defense, which it is, because Ohio State locking down your offense really has nothing to do with your own abilities. If you're going to slow down Ohio State, you have to have elite pass defense, all right? And that is what they are. Notre Dame has one of the best secondaries in the country. That's a fact. That's their best strength on this team, maybe besides Jeremiah Love, but certainly in the playoff and recently, their number one quality has been that pass defense. Conversely, Will Howard is the best quarterback that they played against all year long. All right. Notre Dame has not played against a quarterback at the level of Will Howard. Drew Aller counts. Gunnar Stockton counts. Maybe if Carson Beck was in that game and they had won, then that's a better example. But Will Howard is the best quarterback that Notre Dame's had to face all year long, which means that this is a new challenge that Notre Dame hasn't quite had to tackle. Okay. That's going to mean a couple things, because you're going to have to force him to make mistakes. You're going to have to force the pressure onto him, because Will Howard's not going to make mistakes on his own. You could make an argument that Notre Dame was bailed out by Drew Aller's interception at the end of the game. And of course, the secondary had to make that play, but that decision from Drew Aller was honestly horrific, and Will Howard is not going to make a mistake like that. Drew Aller gave the game to Notre Dame. Will Howard in that spot, in that position, would not give the game away to Notre Dame in the same way, most likely. So if we just copy and paste these two games and restart, if we fast forward to this game, we find it's 24-24 with just over a minute left like it was, and Ohio State has the ball and it's Will Howard and his receivers, that's not how that drive goes. It's not an easy interception that Notre Dame just has to routinely pick up, march like 20 yards down the field and kick a field goal. That's not going to happen. If it's Ohio State in that situation, Ohio State's probably scoring and they're probably winning, because, again, you're going to have to force the mistakes out of Will Howard. With that pressure, you're going to have to overwhelm him. It's going to be very difficult and maybe impossible to force him to make the same or similar mistakes that Drew Aller did, but he's definitely not just going to do it to himself, right? He's definitely not going to just do it on his own. You could argue that Notre Dame loses to Penn State if Penn State had better quarterback play on that day. Drew Aller was missing throws. He threw some interceptions. He made mistakes. There certainly were some open receivers that he just missed. If Will Howard's on that Penn State team, Penn State's probably playing in the national championship game right now. Obviously, he wasn't. Notre Dame won. They're here. But the point is, now they have to play Will Howard. Now they have to play this team in Ohio State that, again, is a much more well-oiled machine under Ryan Day, arguably. And it's going to be much more difficult to force the mistakes out of this quarterback and this offense. The other thing for Notre Dame is going to be turnovers and splash play prevention, and this goes on both sides. Notre Dame is one of the best teams in the country at turning the ball over. They turn the ball over. They keep care of the ball themselves as well. They're going to take away the ball from Ohio State probably at least once. I don't know how. I don't know when. I don't know in what situation that would occur. But Notre Dame's good at that. That's one of their biggest strengths, is turning the ball over. So you first of all have to carry out that. You have to execute in that way. If Notre Dame doesn't win the turnover battle, they probably don't win the game, right? Notre Dame they've gotten here through turnovers in a lot of ways. In a lot of situations, they've gotten here through turnovers. And a great example is the Georgia game at the end of the first half. They took that ball away, and that's a 14-point swing. And then, of course, the game-sealing interception, mostly until that field goal went through against Penn State. Another great example, but across the board, they're one of the best teams at turning the ball over. They have to maintain that against Ohio State, which, again, is going to be difficult because Will Howard's not going to throw bad balls like maybe Drew Aller did. But across the board, Notre Dame's going to have to turn the ball over. They're going to have to win the turnover battle. And then, similarly, they're going to have to limit the big plays downfield, right? Because that's Ohio State can really, really kill you, is when you have the receivers that Ohio State has and when you have the quarterback that's feeding the ball to them. And when they have that speed and they have that athletic ability against a Notre Dame secondary that, albeit maybe is one of the best in the country, it also is to some degree injured. Benjamin Morrison is still out. So Ohio State, that's how they can really beat you. And that's what they did against Oregon, it felt, was when they beat you over the top, when they throw the ball 40 yards down the field and end up scoring, that's when Ohio State runs away with it. And again, Notre Dame can't play from behind. At least they haven't been able to play from behind yet. And when I say behind, I really mean 14 points or more. Because, sure, they came back from 10-0 at close to the end of the first half against Penn State, but that's not going to be something that's necessarily replicable against Ohio State in the national championship game compared to the national semifinal game. So Riley Leonard, he's going to have to play well. He's going to have to be successful on the ground. He can't be making big mistakes against that Ohio State secondary. Ohio State, they're going to take away their receivers. They're going to take away Jeremiah Love, most likely. Can Riley Leonard make something happen on the ground himself? That's going to be a question that Notre Dame has to answer. And then on the other side of the ball, it's whether or not they can really keep the game closer to the line of scrimmage there and avoid those big 40-yard chunk plays from Ohio State. Notre Dame's been good at avoiding those. They let up a couple against Georgia. They did not against Penn State for the most part. If Ohio State's able to get those big splash plays and they win the turnover battle, I think that's all they need. I think the game's over from there, just because Ohio State naturally is more talented and is a much better team than Notre Dame is on paper. So Notre Dame, it's going to come down to staying afloat defensively and finding ways to win on offense, right? If you're maintaining a drive and you find yourself at the 25-yard line, that has to be a touchdown, right? If you're playing well and you have a well-run drive going, you're at 7 plays and 5 minutes, something along those lines, that has to be a scoring drive. Notre Dame's going to have to find ways to score on offense and win on offense while just staying afloat defensively and keeping Ohio State from running away with it. Because the second they start to run away with it, it's only going to get worse from there. If Ohio State goes up 2 touchdowns, if they go up 3 possessions, the game's over. I don't think Notre Dame has any chance of coming back from a 3-possession deficit. So limit big plays. Notre Dame's got to succeed on the ground, but really, at the end of the day, it's about keeping it low scoring. Because who are the teams that had the best chance of beating Ohio State all year? In the first game against Oregon, I'm going to nix because Oregon, of course, had that win avenged in the playoffs. Michigan beat Ohio State 13-10. They kept it low scoring. Texas had the best chance of any team since then, and it was 28-14, 21-14 down the stretch, right? Keep it low scoring. Defense has got to be the focus, and just find ways to score offensively. Because if Ohio State lets up if pass interference calls start falling your way against Ohio State, those are the type of things you need to take advantage of, especially as you get to the red zone. I don't think that will happen. I think that Ohio State's going to roll. I think their offense is going to be totally fine. Maybe it's low scoring, but again, it was low scoring against Texas, and they managed to pull out the victory there. I don't think Notre Dame has the ability to come from behind, and I think they'll have to at least once. Whether the game starts out pretty evenly scored and Ohio State pulls away at the beginning of the second half, I don't think Notre Dame's going to come back from that. Or maybe Ohio State starts right away really hot out of the gate. I just think that the way this pass rush has been playing, I think Riley Leonard's going to be put in some very difficult positions, and he's going to have mistakes forced out of him. I really just think this Ohio State defense is too much for Notre Dame. I don't think they're going to be able to handle it, especially as injured as they are. I don't think that they have the personnel to be able to contend with that. So that could be what it comes down to as well. But if Notre Dame's going to win, Riley Leonard's going to have to be able to gain significant yardage running the ball and really bail out the offense in certain situations. They're going to have to win the turnover battle. They're going to have to keep this game low scoring and keep Ohio State from making some of those splash plays that they did against Oregon. It's going to be difficult. Ohio State is favored by 8, 9.5 at this point. I think they win, and I think they cover, and I think that this game isn't truly close anytime past the second quarter.